A to Z Mysteries, Book Number 18, The Runaway Racehorse, by Runaway. Chapter 3. Tinker Bunks looked serious. "If he shows up, I'll give you a shout." "I'd appreciate that," Forrest said. "He's running at Saratoga tomorrow." "Is he now?" Mr. Bunk said. "I wish you luck." They all left the barn. The sky had grown darker. As Forrest drove through the woods, Dink heard thunder. Wind began to whip tree branches back and forth. Forrest drove faster. "I'd better get us home before Josh and Ruth Rose have a shower," he said. Forrest parked behind his barn just as raindrops began to splatter the windshield. "Let's run for it," he said, leaping from the cab. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose ran, squealing, as the clouds opened up. In seconds, they were soaking wet. Inside the house, Forrest handed them towels. They dried their hair and faces. "Why don't you settle in while I call the police?" he said. "Ruth Rose, you're in the blue bedroom. Guys, you're bunking right across the hall." The kids grabbed their backpacks and headed toward the back of Forrest's house. Ruth Rose stopped outside a bedroom with blue wallpaper. "See you guys in a minute," she said, and disappeared inside. Dink and Josh walked into their room and changed into dry shirts. A minute later, Ruth Rose knocked and came in. Her wet hair was even curlier than usual. "What could have happened to Whirlaway?" she asked Dink and Josh. Dink looked out the bedroom window. Through the rain, he could see the barn, but he couldn't see the barn's rear doors. "You know, someone could have stolen him," Dink said. "Stolen him?" Josh said. "In broad daylight?" Dink pointed. "You can't see the back doors of the barn from the house," he said. "Anyone could go in and out that way." Ruth Rose peered through the streaming window. "How would you steal a horse?" she asked. "Would you need a trailer?" "Or the thief could just ride him away," Josh said. "Let's go look behind the barn for clues when the rain stops," Ruth Rose said. "Maybe the police had some good news for Forrest," Dink said. They headed for the kitchen. Forrest was also staring out the window into the rain. His shoulders were hunched, and he was nervously tapping his fingers on the counter. Uncle Warden was sitting at the table, drinking a mug of tea. "Did you call the police?" Dink asked. Forrest turned away from the window and nodded. "Yes, they told me no one's called in about a stray horse," he said. "I'm getting worried." "Do you think someone might have stolen him?" Dink asked. Forrest looked at him and blinked a few times. "Stolen Whirlaway? I suppose it's possible." "Forrest, have you any neighbors who own horses?" Uncle Warden asked. "A few. Why?" "Because Whirlaway may not be the only missing horse," Uncle Warden said. "Perhaps you should call around." "Good idea, I will," Forrest said. "We'll help you look for him when the rain stops," Ruth Rose said. Forrest nodded. "That'll be great." "Now I'd better get on the phone," he said as he left the kitchen. The kids drank milk and ate cookies with Uncle Warden. They watched the rain streak down the windows. Forrest came back a few minutes later. "I called 2 friends who own horses," he said. "None are missing, but my friends said they'd keep an eye out for Whirlaway." The rain continued. They played Scrabble. When it wasn't his turn, Forrest kept jumping up to call more neighbors. Finally, the rain stopped and the clouds cleared. When Dink looked out the window, sunlight sparkled off trees and bushes. "I'll go pick up some food for dinner," Uncle Warden said. He took a set of car keys from a hook and left the house. "Okay, kids, let's go look for my horse," Forrest said. He and the kids put on sneakers and headed through the kitchen door to the yard. The wet grass squished under their feet. They walked behind the barn. Forrest headed toward the woods, whistling and yelling, "Whirlaway!" Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose checked the wet ground for tire tracks or footprints. Nothing, Josh muttered. Even if there were clues, the rain washed them away. Suddenly, the kids heard a soft whinny from inside the barn. Dink yelled for Forrest, who came running. "Whirl away," Forrest said. They all ran into the barn. Standing outside Whirlaway's stall was a wet, muddy horse. "Where have you been, boy?" Forrest asked his horse. Whirlaway shook his head. Water and mud flew off his mane. He stomped his front foot and gazed at the humans. Forrest walked over and grasped Whirlaway's halter. It too was muddy. Forrest laughed and shook his head. "Looks like you've been rolling in a big mud puddle," he said. "Kids, do you know how to wash a horse?" "Yes," Josh said. "We wash my pony all the time." Forrest pointed to a hose and some buckets and sponges. He handed Ruth Rose a container of green soap. "Just be careful of his feet," he said. Forrest snapped a leather lead onto Whirlaway's halter, then hooked the other end to a post. "Rinse the mud off first, then soap him down good." Just then they heard a phone ringing from the house. "I'd better get that," Forrest said. "When Whirlaway is dry, just put him back in his stall." He hurried back to the house. Dink filled the bucket with water, then turned the hose on Whirlaway. The horse stood still as muddy water cascaded off his sides. Ruth Rose poured some soap into the bucket, making the water turn green. The suds smelled like freshly cut grass. The kids soaked 3 big sponges in the soapy water. They each began washing a different part of the horse. Whirlaway rolled his eyes and tried to watch all 3 kids. "Hey, look at this," Josh said. He pointed to the horse's side. There was a mark in the mud. It was egg-shaped, about as big as his hand. Inside the oval was some kind of wiggly shape. "Josh, have you been finger painting again?" Ruth Rose teased. "I didn't do that," Josh said. "It was already there." The 3 kids looked closely at the imprint. "It almost looks like someone stamped him with something," Josh said. Chapter 4. "Whirlaway could have gotten that when he was rolling in the mud," Dink said. "He probably rolled over a rock or a piece of wood." "Yeah, probably," Josh said. He wiped his soapy sponge over the change sign, and it disappeared. Dink chained the hose on Whirlaway again to rinse off the soap. Ruth Rose found some towels hanging on the wall, and they rubbed Whirlaway's coat. When he was dry and shining, Ruth Rose unhooked Whirlaway's lead from the post to put him in his stall. "Come on, boy," she said. Whirlaway rolled his eyes at Ruth Rose. He stiffened his legs and refused to walk. "Good job, kids," Forrest said as he walked into the barn. "He looks like a new horse." "He won't go in his stall," Ruth Rose said. "Let me try," Forrest said. He took the lead from Ruth Rose and began stroking Whirlaway's neck. He spoke softly in the horse's ear. After a minute, Whirlaway walked into his stall. He stuck his nose into the oats bucket and began eating. Forrest closed the stall door behind Whirlaway. He was probably a little spooked from being out during the storm and coming home to all these strangers, he said. Just then, Sunny rode through the barn's rear doors on a mountain bike. She hopped off, leaned the bike against a wall, and strode over in tall, muddy boots. "There's the bad boy," she said, reaching over the stall door to pet his nose. Whirlaway rolled his eyes, threw his head up, and backed into a corner. "Easy, boy," Sunny murmured. She looked at Forrest. "He seems scared of me." "He did the same thing with me," Ruth Rose said. The 5 humans watched the horse, who was also watching them. "Maybe he doesn't feel good," Dink suggested. "Could he have eaten something bad while he was gone?" Josh asked. It's possible, Forrest said, but he looks fine, and he just ate some oats. Sunny studied the horse. I hope he runs okay tomorrow. How far away is Saratoga? Dink asked. A few hours. It's near Albany, Sunny told him. She looked at Forrest. I'll come over at 6 and load Whirlaway into the trailer. I'll be there in plenty of time for him to relax before his race. Good, Forrest said. Now let's go see what Warden bought for our supper. Forrest looked at his horse. No more disappearing tricks, fella, he said. Sunny pulled the stall's top door shut and checked that the latch was in place. See you tomorrow in Saratoga, she said. The kids watched her straddle her mountain bike and ride out the door. She looked funny pedaling a bike in muddy rubber boots. Uncle Warden was back with groceries. Soon they were all eating a hearty meal. After supper, they finished the Scrabble game. At 9 o'clock, Forrest stood up and yawned. Long day tomorrow, he said. I'm ready to turn in. Sounds good to me, too, said Uncle Warden. See you all in the morning. He patted Dink on the head and left the room. The kids padded down the hall to their rooms. As Dink and Josh were crawling into their beds, they heard a knock. Ruth Rose opened the door. Nice Daffy Duck jammies, Josh, she said, marching into the room with her book. Quack, quack, Josh said. Ruth Rose sat on the end of Dink's bed with the book on her lap. I want to read you guys something, she said. Oh, goody, Josh said. Can we have milk and cookies, too? Ruth Rose held up her book. This is really about learning to ride your own horse, she said. But there's a chapter about jockeys. She opened the book and began reading. Jockeys must earn the horse's trust. A good jockey does this by feeding and grooming the horse regularly. Most horses learn to like their jockeys and become friends. Ruth Rose looked up from the page. Does anything strike you about that? She asked. Like what? Said Josh. Well, did you notice how Whirlaway acted around Sunny? Ruth Rose said. He sure didn't seem very friendly to her, said Dink. Yeah, he backed away as soon as she came in, said Josh. Exactly, Ruth Rose said. I think Whirlaway's afraid of Sunny.